Now I want to delve deep into the story. Jill Doherty, CNN's former Moscow bureau chief, joins us now. Jill, and I want to bring this video up for our viewers. In terms of how these attacks played out, and you can see the drone emerging from the mobile home it was smuggled in on, then heading to the airbase. The big question of how they pulled this off, I mean, we know they say it's a year in the making, but when you see this, what comes to mind?
Well, I mean, again, Nick used the word audacious and extraordinary, and I think it really is. I mean, this is, you have the, let's say the military, the technical side of this, how they did it over a very long period. And then you talk about the timing. Now, I doubt, a year ago, they would be able to know that precisely on this day, there would be negotiations in Istanbul. But I think you have that military side, and then you have the psychological side, because Russia itself has been carrying out massive attacks on Ukraine very recently. On the 25th of May, it was the largest attack, both with ballistic missiles and with drones, in the history of the war. So the fighting is intensifying, and part of this psychological side of this is to convince the other side it's useless to fight. You might as well just give up and accede to the demands of the other side. And it was interesting to me. I have a Russian friend who was telling me, talking with their family back in Moscow, that they literally said the war is no longer far away. It is now close to Moscow. And of course, when you look at that map, going out all the way almost to China and to Japan, it's quite astounding. So I think that psychological part of this might be important too for average people. And you can see that on social media as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so highly sophisticated, infiltrating Russian territory, being able to pull this off without anyone noticing. And you spoke about the psychological impact and the hit on morale. We understand what the operational damage is, but I wonder how you are thinking the President Putin would likely respond to this blow.
Well, it could be that he intensifies, which is almost hard to imagine right now because it's very intense, but he could continue that constant bombing, both in retaliation and increase his demands. Right now, it's not only that the Russians are insisting on having the territory that they have claimed but do not physically control. They are now looking into going into, like, the Sumy region, parts of Ukraine that they don't control at all, and claiming that. So there's this territory side of it too, and negotiations are at the apex, even though I don't think realistically very many people expect much of anything from what's going to happen in Istanbul and is happening right now, realistically, Eleni.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. These talks are on the go in Istanbul right now. And you've also made it clear that Russia has been increasing its assault on Ukraine, aggressively so. The Ukrainian president had spoken in Turkey, and he actually spoke in Lithuania. I want you to take a listen to what he said about the escalation.
Europe, together with America, has better weapons than Russia. We also have stronger tactical solutions. Our Operation Spiderweb yesterday proved that. Russia must feel what its losses mean. That is what will push it toward diplomacy. And when Russia takes losses in this war, it's obvious to everyone that Ukraine is the one holding the line, not just for itself, but for all of Europe.
So Jill, I wonder, are you seeing Ukraine now having a better hand at negotiation, given that Vladimir Putin has been saying, he wants specific territory and, for the Ukrainian president to make concessions? Does this change the negotiation tactic from the Ukrainian side?
I think as you hear from Zelensky, they feel that they now have a much stronger hand. I'm not going to say the upper hand, as he would argue, but definitely a much stronger hand. And that might affect the calculus in Russia. I mean, if you have a lot of the Air Force, or significant portion of the Air Force that was driving the war against Ukraine destroyed, and then you have this again dawning on Russians that the war has come home to them, that could have an effect. It's very hard to say what Putin would decide to do. And don't forget, the demands that the Russians have had right now, today, and going back actually years, have remained pretty much the same, which are maximalist. The root causes, which means no Ukraine, no NATO for Ukraine, a significantly weakened Ukraine, military that wouldn't be very big, all sorts of demands and territorial demands. So I think the Ukrainians feel strong. It's a moment that they're going to use this, but Putin has not been dissuaded so far. That doesn't mean that he won't change, and it could happen, soon. He too is unpredictable.
Pasi Paranen is an open source analyst at Blackbird Group, and he joins us live now from Finland. Pasi, obviously this is a huge setback for Russia's war machine. People have described it as the kind of attack that will be studied for decades by military historians, even going as far as to say that this is essentially Russia's Pearl Harbor. Give us your take on the significance of this attack.
Yes, these attacks were certainly impressive and destructive. I have to note that the exact number of the destroyed aircraft is likely going to be much lower than the first thrown figure of 40 aircraft, but still anything like 10 to 15 aircraft is still a significant portion of the Russia's quite limited strategic bomber fleet that is operational. And these aircraft are very difficult for the Russians to replace, some of them impossible. And these sort of attacks are very difficult to defend against. And also, we have to note that this attack was only partially successful. Like there were also some hiccups along the way.
We're talking about specifically about Tupolev bombers that were Soviet-era bombers that Russia maintained. I think they have about an arsenal of 100, and even if that number is lower than the 40 claimed to have been taken out by Ukraine, this is still a significant blow for Russia because, and if you can give us more detail as to why, this really impacts their ability to launch longer-range ballistic missiles into Ukraine, which is why they were targeted. Where does that put Russia's Air Force right now in terms of their capability? How far back does this set them?
Overall, they will still be able to continue their long-range strike campaign. Of course, as the number of operational aircraft decreases, the operational strain, the attrition from simply using these aircrafts will increase and will be focused on fewer and fewer chassis. And of course, they cannot launch as big concentrated attacks using every aircraft available. This is also very, very important for the Ukrainian home front that has been feeling the impact from these attacks. The overall impact on the war will be much more limited. The ground domain is still the key area for this war and will decide how it will end. But it is still very much a welcome news for the Ukrainian home front to be able to strike back at these weapons.
And just in terms of the level of planning, I mean, we've talked about the fact that it took about 18 months of planning, but just give us a sense of the type of planning that Ukraine would have had to have engaged in order to pull off something like this.
Yeah, first off, the difficulty of getting explosive materials in large quantities into Russia. Like the drones probably were not that much difficult because there is constantly traffic of commercial drones being delivered across the border. But it takes a determined national actor to deliver this much explosives for this specialized purpose, but not impossible. I suspect that these were transported from Central Asia, like places from like Kazakhstan, it's a long, difficult to secure border with Russia, probably quite a lot of crossing points. So overall, it is a type of attack that is difficult to defend against from a national security point of view. And apparently from Selebyansk in like central Russian Siberia, these strike packages were delivered across Russia using Russian truck drivers who had been hired to do the transportation, like they were unwitting helpers in this attack.
All right, Pasi Purnanen, thank you so much. Appreciate your perspective.